Hi everybody, and welcome as we enter into week number 22 of our journey through the entire New Testament. Thanks for reading along and tuning into these videos that we're producing. Today we're going to take a look at the book of James. The book of James. Now the book of James is a relatively short book. It's just 5 chapters long. It's got only a total of 108 verses, so you can read through James in a hurry. But James is, I like to think of it as kind of like the Old Testament books of wisdom, kind of Proverbs, for example, giving us wise sayings on how to live. James is obviously in the New Testament, but they give us, and it gives us some good advice and some short sayings on how to live as Christians. James, the author, considered to be the brother of Jesus or half-brother of Jesus, written in maybe about 62, 63 AD. James was a leader in the Jerusalem church, the early Christian church, and so he writes this letter to Jewish Christians, new converts into Christianity. And he admits that while we try to live good lives, that none of us are perfect, but he says, I'm going to give you some ways and some advice, some wisdom on how to live as followers of Christ. And so they're kind of some wisdom sayings, and what I want to do is just pick a section from each of these chapters. There's 5 chapters, and just make a couple of comments. Not going to exhaust any of these at all, but I want to just choose some examples of these sayings, these kind of proverbs that James gives us. So in chapter 1, I'm going to just read right away at the beginning, chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. You can follow along in your Bibles at home if you want. But he writes this, he says, "My brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing." That's a difficult saying, to have nothing but joy when you're going through trials. I want to say what James is talking about is that God does not cause suffering. He does not cause your trials. He does not want you to go through disease or hurt or pain. I think of one of my nieces, Kelsey. I've shared about her before. She was born with what's called Batten disease, and it's just an awful disease. God doesn't wish that. God doesn't want it on her. But what James is saying is that in this world, there are challenges. And in this world, there really are trials. And when you go through those, try to give them to God and know the joy that comes from God walking together with you. And that does produce some endurance in your faith. So we could say a lot about it. There's a saying that sometimes you'll hear people say that the Lord will not give you more than you can handle. Or that God will not give you more than you can handle. And I don't like that saying. That's bad theology. I think it's better said that the Lord will help you handle all that the world gives you, that God will walk with you through it. And I think that's part of what James is saying. Not to be joyful because you have trials or that God gave you these trials, but be joyful because God is enduring with you and walking together with you in this pain that you're going through. We could elaborate a lot more on that, but I want to keep moving with some other examples. We move to chapter 2. I'm going to read verses 14 through 17 again as another example. James writes, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill,' and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead." Faith without works is dead. That's kind of a theme for James, and he's giving us comments that our faith needs to be put into action. Martin Luther the founder of our Lutheran faith, didn't like some of that because Luther, out of his context, was coming out of the Catholic Church that was saying requiring works for salvation. In other words, you need to pay for your forgiveness. You need to buy indulgences for your salvation. And Luther said, no, we are saved by grace through faith alone. We are saved by Christ and His work alone. And I know that James knows that, but James is giving us the worldly advice to say, hey, if you see someone in need, don't just say, be of good cheer and have faith. He's giving us the reminder that we need to also assist them in whatever their needs are. And certainly Luther was all about good works too, coming and stemming from the great gift of grace that God has made us right with Christ. And so grace without, faith without works is dead. Luther had some issue with that, but I don't think that they're far apart because Luther knew that being righteous by Christ would produce good works in us. But some good advice from James to take care of one another and to be compassionate with one another and to put our faith into action. Then we move to chapter 3, just real quickly, verses 8 through 10. I want to just read those for you, talking about taming the tongue and using our words for blessings. He says, but no one can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we also curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessings and cursings. My brothers and sisters, this ought not be so among you. James is teaching us that the words we say have an effect. And he's saying, I want you to do, and throughout this book, this letter, he says, I want you to listen more than you speak. And I want you to be attentive to other people and to use your voice as a blessing, not as a curse. So be careful in what you say. You know that words really do have either a very positive effect or a negative effect. So read through James and take his advice to not let your tongue get out of control, criticizing. That leads us right into chapter 4, where he talks and gives us in verses 11 and 12 a warning against judging other people. You know, it's very easy to judge. It's easy to kind of sit back and watch what everybody else is doing and starting to judge what they're doing and condemn what they're doing while they're kind of in the mix of life and you're sitting back and judging. James is saying, be careful to do that. In fact, he's saying, don't do it. He says, let God be the judge. It's easy for us to criticize. Sometimes critique is needed, but James is reminding us to do it if we need to critique others or correct others, to do it humbly and to do it in order to help others. He's kind of saying what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, that you better make sure that you take the log out of your own eye before you take the speck out of someone else's. So be careful about judging. Some wise sayings from James. And finally, in chapter 5, verse 13, I'll just read that one verse. He's got many other verses that speak to this. But it is an exhortation for us to keep on praying. Verse 13 of chapter 5 says, are any among you suffering? They should pray. Are any cheerful? They should sing songs of praise. And he goes on and talks about praying, to pray to God when we're praising and when good things are happening, but also pray to God and bring our concerns to Him when things are not going well for us in our lives. You know that it is healing when you speak to God and you listen for what God is saying. It brings a comfort and a healing. God desires a close relationship with you, and so James gives us that great wise saying and exhortation to stay always in prayer. I wanted to just give you a few little verses and give you a feel for this book of James. Again, it's kind of like Proverbs, some wise sayings about life and what it means to be a follower of Christ. He's not saying we have to be perfect, but he's giving us some advice for the journey as Christ followers. So read through James. You can do it quickly, but lots of good things in there, good little nuggets. Be blessed and happy reading. And next week, we're going to jump into Paul's letter to the Philippians.